be talking about Disability Ministry 101. And this is for any size church, for anyone, on how to start welcoming families with disabilities into your church. And so, with that again, I'm Doc Hunsley. I'm the executive director and founder of SOAR Special Needs. And SOAR stands for Special Opportunities, Abilities, and Relationships. And we're a nonprofit. We're based in Lenexa, Kansas. And for this, we are actually honored to be able to serve all families, all diagnoses, all severities. And with this, we help answer the three main questions that every individual, every family with an individual with disability has. First question, will my child ever be able to provide for themselves? Second question, who will take care of my child once I'm gone? And then the third question, who will take care of me as a parent or a caregiver? And those are three questions that have become taboo for parents, but we help answer those. And then for me, one of the big things that we do is we come alongside churches and help them in being able to answer how to welcome families into the church. And that is a really big thing, and that's what I'm passionate about. God has allowed me to come now alongside over 600 churches throughout the United States and 19 countries around the world to be able to help them learn how to welcome families with individuals with disabilities. So I want to go ahead and just talk a little bit about why we need to do welcome families with disabilities and what we're talking about here with this. So first, what are we talking about? Well, here we are talking about having individuals with special needs, but why do I do what I do? Well, first, let me give you a little background about myself. My name is Stephen, but everyone calls me Doc because I'm actually a pediatrician. I was a pediatric ER doctor. And I got sick taking care of my patients and almost died, should have died. I actually spent 46 days in the intensive care unit where I should not have lived. Top 4 diagnoses on my chart, each one by itself, had a 0.01 survival rate. And God had his hand on me, allowed me to survive. Made it, and I was so sick they forgot to give me nutrition. As a result, I lost 75 pounds of muscle mass. 3 different times they told my wife to come in the middle of the night because I wasn't going to survive and make it through the night. But God allowed me to live and helped me through that whole experience. And then I had to go through over a year of rehab just to be able to learn to walk again. And going through that, but I got home and all of a sudden I found out I couldn't walk up a flight of stairs without almost passing out because I couldn't breathe. I found out that, I was an athlete all my life. I was a former Air Force veteran. I was in decent shape, but all of a sudden I couldn't do any of these things. So then went on, and God allowed me to get better, and I got ready to go back to work. Had my flu shot and went back to work, and despite having my flu shot, second day on the job, I got sick again and got admitted to the hospital, into the intensive care unit, where once again I almost died and should have died. And they then determined I'm the only known person in the world where the main muscle allows you to breathe is the diaphragm, and half of mine is paralyzed. As a result, I only have 40% lung function. Only the left side of my lung works. And that's why I could never have good respirations, good breathing. Made it through that hospitalization. Then my second son, Mark, was born. I'm blessed with 3 kids, 2 boys and a girl. And Mark was born, took a week off paternity leave, and then came back to the hospital and got called into an important meeting where basically every one of my bosses was there, and they informed me that I became a medical legal risk to the hospital. And instead of practicing, they did not terminate my job, they terminated my career and said I could never practice medicine again. So I then took the hardest job I ever had in my life, and that was Mr. Mom for my 2 boys. And when Mark was 8 months old, he had his first seizure. It lasted over 4 hours. And then fast forward, by the time He was 18 months old. We got the diagnosis of Dravet syndrome, a very rare genetic seizure disorder. And by the time he was 2, we got the diagnosis of autism. And so my wife's a pediatrician, I'm a pediatrician. We served a lot of individuals with special needs. But it was the first time in our life we finally understood how difficult it is to be a parent of a child with special needs. It's 24/7, 365. You just never ever get a break. And it's very, very difficult. And moving forward, now about 14 years ago next week, will mark the anniversary of my son being born into heaven at the age of 5.5. So we were blessed with him for 5.5 years, learned the highs and lows of being a parent, then walked through the grief of losing a child. But I want to start off by saying, would you have this child in your church? Would you have this child in your children's ministry? Well, unfortunately today, the majority of churches would not. In fact, only 11% of churches today welcome individuals with disabilities and their families. 11%. 89% literally turn them away and say you're not welcome. My friends, that's not right. And most importantly, it's not biblical. And we're going to get to that in a minute. Now, my son, he appears completely normal. But I can't tell you how many times as a parent, complete strangers would come up to me and tell me that I'm not just a bad parent, I'm a horrible parent because my son is having an autistic meltdown. Or on 5 occasions, he's harming himself, hurting himself, and I'm trying to protect him. And on 5 occasions, I would have police officers come up and pull their gun on me and threaten to arrest me or threaten to tase me because they thought I was endangering my son. Folks, that's the everyday life for a parent of a child with special needs. It's 24/7, 365. The stress is sky high, and you cannot understand it unless you live it yourself. So let's take a minute and talk about some of the numbers with special needs so we can understand the importance of this. Currently today, according to the CDC, 26% of the U.S. population today has a diagnosis of special needs or disabilities. That makes them the largest minority group in the United States. By this time next year, the CDC is expecting that number to be 37%, 1/3 of this country. Now, the important thing to remember, this is the only minority group that affects everybody. It affects all ages, all socioeconomic, and truly all ethnic groups. And it's the only minority group that you can join at any point in your lifetime. And in fact, if you live long enough, 100% of us will be in this minority group. I am now in this minority group. I'm now disabled. I only have 40% lung function. I never thought I would be in this minority group, but I am. And the church is not there to help these families. At the same time, currently it's about 1 out of every 6 to 1 out of every 5 kids in the country has special needs. That number is going to rise this year, probably to 1 out of every 4. And it's currently 1 out of every 4 to 1 out of every 5 adults has a diagnosis of special needs or disability in the country. The other thing to realize is our school system for elementary students and high school students. Currently today in the U.S., the average is 15% of our children in elementary and high school are receiving special education. So let's come back to the church. If your church doesn't have at least 26% of its congregation with a disability or special needs, or your children's ministry doesn't have at least 15% with special needs, you're not serving your community. The community around you is there, but they're not coming. And it's the largest unmet people group, and we'll get there in a minute. At the same time, we need to realize that divorce is sky high in this group. It is estimated that families with disabilities have a divorce rate of between 80 and 90%. 90. You add a medical illness like seizures or diabetes, that jumps to 95%. It's because the stress is sky high. That's an equal number to combat war veterans as well as professional athletes. But there are wonderful organizations that help those groups. There's no one out there helping individuals with special needs. But it all comes down to parenting a child with special needs is a 24-hour-a-day, 7-day a week, 365-day-a-year job that is incredibly stressful. You cannot just go and ask the neighbor girl to come babysit. So these parents are strapped and need help and need assistance. But for every one individual that you see who appears like they have a special needs or disability, there are 4 more people with what we call hidden disabilities. They appear completely normal. My son has a hidden disability. He appeared completely normal. That's why everyone would tell us we are bad parents. It was his autism, and we need more education with that. But hidden disabilities include mental health, anxiety, depression. It includes bipolar with that, post-traumatic stress disorder, traumatic brain injury, just trauma in general. It also includes ADD, intellectual learning disabilities, and many more. But let's just talk a minute about some of the mental health and what we see now. And this is from NAMI, it's National Organization of Mental Illness. And according to them, today 1 out of every 5 children between the ages of 13 and 18 have serious mental illness. 1 out of every 5. Now let's take to the next one. 1 out of every 5 adults in America have a diagnosis of mental illness today. And nearly half of all nearly half of all chronic mental illness begins before the age of 14. So we have all these individuals, especially kids, who are experiencing mental health, and they are also being excluded from the church. So when I'm talking about special needs and disabilities, we include this along with it. And then at the same time, when we actually break down mental health in different types of mental illness by diagnosis, 18% of American adults today have an anxiety disorder. That's a huge number. 7% have major depression. So it's all around us, and we need to be prepared and work with them. So let's now start talking about why is a disability ministry important? Why should your church welcome these families? Well, first off, for families with disabilities, 90% of families with an individual with disability do not attend church. 90%, 90. And there's 3 reasons for it. First, they're afraid the church is not prepared to take care of their child. Well, we know that already, that is true. We just saw only 11% of churches are even welcoming families with disabilities. So that's right on. Second, they know what a burden their child is, so they don't want to be a burden to the church, so they don't come. And then the third reason, and this is what breaks my heart, they've been asked to leave the church too many times before, and they are afraid God has given up on them. My friends, God has never given up on them. But it is the people in the church who allow fear to push them away. And when we don't understand something, we act like an ostrich and put our head in the sand and put our hands out and say, I don't want that. That is not what we're supposed to do, and there's a biblical mandate that we have to follow. But families with disabilities are the largest unmet people group in the United States. So let's see what this actually looks like. All right? So this is a picture. This can be your church in your community. I've got a picture of the church with homes surrounding it. This can be anywhere in the United States. Every single one of these dots represents a house with an individual with disability. That's 26% of the homes. So allow that to sink in. we're talking about a large number of homes that are in your community that we need to reach out. Now, let's really drive it home. 10% are actually going to church. That's the red dots. So only 10% are red dots. They're connected to a church. Look at that lush, unmet people group that are longing to have a church to go to, but they don't have a church because the church is not welcoming them. So my prayer today is that you're going to realize that we are being called to do this. It is a biblical mandate. So let's go right into that and see what the Bible has to say about individuals with special needs. So first off, many years ago, I was getting ready to preach, and God laid it on my heart to list every miracle that we have recorded in the Bible that Jesus did. And as I listed those all out, I quickly added it up. Over 75% of Jesus' miracles were on individuals with special needs and disabilities. Think about it. He healed the lame, he healed the blind, he healed the deaf. If we really want to be more like Jesus, he was the very first special needs pastor. He constantly went to those with disabilities. Why? Because each individual with special needs is still created in the image and likeness of God. They are not a mistake. God created them on purpose and for a purpose. And they are just as much of the family of God as you and I are. But let's get into really the meat of this. Luke 14 is where we get our biblical mandate for why we need to welcome families with disabilities. And so let me set this up. This is the Great Wedding Banquet. And the Great Wedding Banquet, again, representing the church, the banquet, the table being the church. And the bridegroom comes up to Jesus and says, Rabbi, I've invited all my family, all of our guests, and there's still room at the table. Again, the table being the church. And this is Jesus' reply. And we're in Luke 14, verses 12 to 14. Let me read it. And he says, Then he also said to him who invited him, When you give a dinner or a supper, do not ask your friends, your brothers, your relatives, nor rich neighbors, lest they also invite you back, and you be repaid. But when you give a feast, invite the poor, the maimed, the lame, the blind, and you will be blessed, because they cannot repay you. For you shall be repaid at the resurrection of the just. So let's break that down and see what this is actually saying. First off, this is a perfect picture of inclusion. Why? Because those with disabilities need the church just as much as the church needs those with disabilities. They go hand in hand. If you want to have a world-class church, if you want to have a world-class children's ministry, if you want to have a world-class student ministry, if you want to have a world-class ministry of any kind, you have to welcome families with disabilities. Because it's impossible to be world-class without having individuals with disabilities. They go together. But this is an absolute beautiful picture and model of inclusion. But here's how important this is. It's one of the few times in Scripture that Jesus immediately gives the command again in the next verses that follow. And here is where we actually see Jesus says it again. But this time he gives it a little differently. This time he says, go now into the street, bring the lame, bring the blind, bring the deaf, and give them a seat of honor at the table. So let's break down and why, so that you'll be blessed. So why? What is he actually saying? Jesus, first off, don't miss what he said at first. He said, go now, go today. There's two parts of that. One, we're being told and ordered and commanded, go today. We don't wait until we have the volunteers. We don't wait until we have the families. We don't wait until we have the training, until we have the money, until everything's perfect. We go now. Two, it's an active part of going. We go out and we help find the families and we bring them in. It has to be active on our part that we're actually welcoming them. We just don't stand and say, oh, they'll come to us. We have to be going out and doing that. But in the way to have it truly be like a piece of heaven, we need to have ministry with and by individuals with disabilities. We don't want to just put them in a room or put them somewhere and have glorified babysitting. We need to have ministry where we're doing ministry with them, and they need to be placed in leadership where they're able to do ministry to others and ministry by them. That's what this is all about. But then he goes on and says, why do you do this? So that you will be blessed. I'm telling you, your church will be blessed. I mentioned it a little bit earlier. My church, I ended up starting a disability ministry. I started with 3 individuals, recruited 20 volunteers. 8 years later, we're serving 800 individuals with disabilities and 2,500 volunteers. Went from 1 campus to 3 campuses. My friends, that's God's blessing. God will always provide, and he wants to provide. But this is God's sweet spot. This is where God truly loves the least of these. And when we welcome them and we honor God the way he commands us to, he is going to provide. And so if your church really wants to be more like Jesus, you're going to welcome families with disabilities. So what does this look like? This is one of my favorite pictures I've ever seen. Several years ago, I got to go just not too far from here to the Johnny and Friends worldwide headquarters. And this is a mural on the wall at Johnny and Friends that depicts this. And this is really what this is like, where we have a banquet that everybody is at. You see Jesus there. Actually, you see Johnny Erickson Tada right there in the middle. But you see those with disabilities and those without. And we're celebrating life hand in hand right next to each other. Individuals with disabilities are serving others, and those without disabilities are serving. It's ministry with, and it's ministry by. This is the true picture of what Jesus is talking about in Luke 14, and what our goal should be as we move forward with that. But what else does the Bible have to say? Well, let's go to 1 Corinthians 12:23. And that says, the parts of the body that seem to be weaker are indispensable. And on those parts of the body we think are less honorable, we bestow the greater honor. God is telling us these people are not the lesser. They have a great honor, and we are missing the mark by not having them in our church. Now here's the next one. And this is one of my favorite things, and God definitely did this on purpose, because many people say, oh, it's okay. They've got a disability because of sin in somebody's life, of the parent or the individual. Jesus takes care of that and says, no, that is not the point. In John chapter 9, verses 1-3, it says, now as Jesus passed by, he saw a man who was blind from birth. And his disciples asked him, saying, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? Jesus answered, neither this man nor his parents sinned, but that the works of God should be revealed in him. What is it all about? It's so that we can see the works of God. That is what individuals with disabilities are all about, seeing God being glorified. And if you've ever worked with an individual with disability, you can just see the love of God being poured out of them. They're the ones who truly get it. So let's sum it all up. What is Jesus' view when it comes to disabilities? It is that people with disabilities are no different from those without. They belong to a body of believers, and they are capable of using their unique giftedness to do God's work. There is no difference. In fact, when I go and look at the Great Commission, what does that say? Go into all the world and share the gospel, preach the gospel. Well, my friends, when I read the Great Commission, there is no disclaimer on that. It doesn't say only if you have an IQ over 70, only if you are fully able, go do it. It's all. We are all called to share the gospel. No matter what our gifting, our ability is. We are all called. And we need to treat that the same way as the church. We need to welcome every individual into our church, no matter what it's like. So our attitude towards disabilities needs to be completely shaped by God. There are many diagnoses and many descriptions of disabilities, but ultimately, we're talking about people. We're not talking about conditions or syndromes or labels. Just remember that each person is completely created in the image and likeness of God, and they have immense innate value. A disability, no matter what kind, no matter what severity, does not make anyone less of a human being. Every living, breathing person has a spirit that is capable of responding to the Holy Spirit. So never assume that anyone is beyond the ability of God to touch their lives in some significant way. They are created on purpose and for a purpose. So, what exactly is a disability ministry? Bottom line, it exists to impart the Word of God in the hearts of all individuals in an engaging and understandable manner, and to teach them to love, to know, and to honor God. Bottom line is, the church needs to be a place of refuge where the families know that their individual with special needs is loved on and taught the love of Jesus. They go together. So how do we define special needs in regard to ministry and the church? Well, basically the way I defined it is any need a family member may need, any age, whoever it is, that requires some forethought in order to ensure that that family's church experience is meaningful and safe. So this includes severe allergies, it includes medical issues, it includes cognitive differences, it includes everything. It's not just physical disabilities. It includes everything, and we got to be ready for that. But here's the bottom line. A special needs ministry is actually a ministry to the entire family. It's not just to the individual with special needs. Because you have to serve the siblings, and you have to serve the parents, and then you're also serving the grandparents. It's the only ministry that goes throughout every single ministry in the church. Every ministry in the church is affected by special needs. And you need to be aware of that and respond with that. You might be saying, what do you mean with that? Well, two things. First, no one should ever age out of your disability ministry. So if you start with something in the children's ministry, that child in elementary will eventually be a middle schooler. And you have to have something for them. Eventually, they're going to be a high schooler. And you need to have programming for them. And then they're going to be out of high school and be an adult. And you need to have something for them. So you need to plan ahead and be prepared for that. But here's the thing. What you do in children's doesn't work in middle school and high school. And what you do for middle school and high school doesn't work for adults. So we got to be willing to understand we have to meet the needs of our individuals as we go through. But when I say it has to work with every single ministry, we have to think through how other ministries work. So I'm going to use worship as an example. What happens when most worship leaders stand up before your congregation? The majority of worship leaders say, would you please stand and worship with us this morning? Well, that's great, but what if someone is in a wheelchair and they can't stand? Or grandma just had a hip replacement and she can't stand. Or grandpa or dad just had a knee replacement and they can't stand. I've actually had conversation with these people. And their answer to me is, I feel like I'm being told I cannot worship God today because I'm unable to stand. That's not our heart. I know that's not the worship leader's heart. So now many worship leaders are saying, well, if you're able, please stand and join us. They still feel like they're not welcomed because they're not able to stand. So I come in and I train churches to do what we really need them to do. I come and say, tell them what you really want them to do. So here's how I train a worship leader. If I were the worship leader, I'd get in front of the church and I'd say, would you please join us today in worshiping from your heart? Doesn't that do it? Isn't that what we really want? We want to worship God from our heart. And that way, if we stand, fantastic. If we sit, great. If we do cartwheels all the way down the aisle, praise God. We all worship God in our own way. We've got to be willing to allow that to happen and know that everybody is different. And just because someone's doing something different than you doesn't make it bad. And sometimes individuals with special needs are going to be loud. They're going to be different, but that's okay. One of my adult that I told you I started with, he was 26 years old, had Fragile X, and he was nonverbal, he couldn't talk, but he absolutely loved our worship. And as soon as worship started in our church service, he would charge the stage, and we had a big 5-foot stage, and he'd charge the stage, and he'd stand right next to it, and he had perfect beat. He would beat on the stage with the drum. And he would be quiet until we all started singing. And as soon as we started singing, this is what you heard. Ah! And as soon as he did that, the church, a lot of people went quiet. They're looking at each other and talking to one another. And they were upset. Many people got up and left. And the worship pastor came to me and said, Doc, you have to help him be quiet. That's disruptful to the church. So I replied back, I said, wait, aren't we wanting to show worship? And he goes, of course, but that's not worship. I go, show me how it's not worship. He only does that when you sing. And he doesn't start making that noise until everyone starts singing. That's his form of worship. There's no question in my heart, he knows the Lord and Savior as his personal Lord and Savior, and he loves God, and he's worshiping God. Because he's doing it in a different way that we don't understand doesn't make it wrong. And he's like, I never thought about that. Guess what happened the next week? He does the whole same thing. People start looking. We finish the song. Our worship leader turns to him and calls him out by name and says, I wish the rest of this church would worship as open and freely as you do. The church changed. No one complained anymore because they realized it was worship. And so it's part of our job to bring awareness to everyone else. But there should be 4 goals of a disability ministry in your church. The first and most important one is we have to open the door to be able to share the gospel with families affected by special needs. And we need to introduce them to a personal relationship with God. That's number 1. Second, we have to integrate those with disabilities into the life of the church and give them opportunities to actively serve God. Remember, it's ministry with and ministry by. Third, we have to enable the church to serve as a witness to the community by meeting the spiritual, the physical, and the social needs of families affected by special needs. And then fourth, the most important, is we have to become a belonging community. Ministry with and ministry by. And I've stolen this from Dr. Eric Carter. I love it, and I'm using it with his permission. But he defines this as everyone is to be present, invited, welcomed, known, accepted, supported, cared for, befriended, needed, and loved. In order to become a belonging community, ministry with and by, let me say that again, they have to be present. They have to be invited. They have to be welcomed. They have to be known. They have to be accepted, supported, cared for, befriended, needed, and loved. That's what this is all about. And we do that by welcoming them in and sharing Christ's love to them. So the bottom line is we want to actually become an inclusive church of belonging. So what does that mean? Basically what it means is that we want all of our individuals with special needs to feel that they are just as valued, just as important as everyone else who walks into your church, as everyone else that comes into that Sunday school class. And inclusive classrooms are rooms where all students are vital members of the classroom, and they feel a connection to their peers, and they have access to meaningful general curriculum, but they may need some additional support to succeed. They may need to have a volunteer, a buddy who's a friend on the side helping them. But we have to create a culture of acceptance. We need to allow visibility in the church and in our events, and allow it to be seen from the stage, from the pulpit. We need to allow our individuals to serve. I had one of our, and you'll see a picture later, one of our individuals became a greeter at one of our doors and hand out the bulletin, severe cerebral palsy, in a wheelchair. And I had to fight to get him to do that. Our welcoming team did not want that because he couldn't talk. And so I said, I will help him and do it. Guess what happened that next Sunday? 75% of our people came in his side of the door because they wanted to see him. They wanted to smile at him and just shake his hand. And then they walked across the church to go sit in their regular seat, because we all know we all have our regular seats, and God forbid we don't sit in our regular seat. But they still wanted to be blessed with that. And go through. Oh, thank you. And so, the other thing, like I said then, is no one should ever age out of your ministry program. And then we want to make sure we give support to them in a way that you would want to be supported. But again, the true goal with all of this is that we are becoming a belonging church. Like I said earlier, ministry with and ministry by. Everyone's present, invited, welcomed, known, accepted, supported, cared for, befriended, needed, and loved. But a better way to understand this maybe is to put it, diversity is being invited to the party. Inclusion is being asked to the dance. Belonging is being missed when you don't attend the party. So let me repeat that and think about that so you understand the difference. Diversity is just being invited to the party. Inclusion is being asked to the dance. But belonging, what we really want as a church, is being missed when you don't attend the party. Folks, we need to be grieving, missing our individuals when they're not here, instead of not even recognizing it. That's part of becoming a belonging community. So, let's start talking. How do I start? What do I do to create a ministry? And you might say, we don't have the space. We don't have the time. We don't have the people. We don't have the money. Stop making excuses. It's a biblical mandate. There are no excuses. Period. You start small. You start with what you have. I promise you, each church here, you have someone with special needs in your church. You don't know it. And they're not telling you they have it because they're afraid if they tell you, you're going to ask them to leave. So you find out what their needs are and you meet their needs and work through that. But we currently have that. If you want, you can create a survey and survey your church to see what kind of needs are truly there. But you start small. You heard my story earlier. I said I started with just what we had. We had 3 people, and we grew that over time. Now here's the other thing. I want to right now take care of a myth that's out there. And that myth is if you build it, they will come. That doesn't happen. Okay? Let me explain it. And you might be going, hold on, time out, Doc. You built it, they came. You went from 3 to 800, 20 to 2,500. That's building it, they came. Yes, but it didn't happen like that. It started real slow. So let me help you understand. If you're a parent, I want you to think about being a parent. Are you about to drop your child off somewhere unless you know that for sure that they know how to take care of your child? Absolutely not. You're not about to do that. Even if they say on a website that they have great child care, you're not about to do it unless you know for sure they know what they're doing and they're safe. Now, have a child with special needs, where the needs are much higher, and your concern is much higher, and you know you can't just have anybody do it. You're really not going to take someone's word for it because they have a shingle on the church, or it's on their website, or it's in the bulletin. You're not going to take their word for it. How does it grow? It grows by the people you already have in the church that you start serving. And then those families will go and talk to the disability community. The special needs disability community is tight. They're a close-knit group. And they'll go and say, hey, you know what, Susie, you need to come and visit my church because they're doing a great job with Tommy. And I know they're doing a great job with Tommy. They definitely do a great job with, Carol, your daughter. You ought to come. Oh, okay. Well, if they're doing a great job with Tommy, yeah, we'll try it out next Sunday. So it grows slowly. So don't think it's going to happen all overnight. But then the next thing we have to do is designate a special needs ministry champion. We need to have a person who's going to be responsible for this ministry to help recruit for it. And then I want you to build the team. Now, this person is going to be helping get the vision for it and be the major cheerleader for this ministry. It might be you. You're sitting here today, and that might be you at your church. And then, this person doesn't have to be on staff. They can be a volunteer, and they can even be a parent. I always say, I've got one requirement to be a volunteer. It's a simple question. Can you be a friend? Can you be a friend? That's where it all starts. You don't have to have any experience. It just starts with being a friend. And then we can teach you everything else. But this ministry champion, then, I want you to build a leadership team. And with this leadership team, you can maybe talk to special education teachers that might be in your church. Most special education teachers are not going to want to help out every single week because they deal with it all week long at work. They want a break on the weekend. But when you ask them to be part of the leadership team to create vision and plans and procedures and meet once a month, they'd love to do that. So that's a great way to go about it. And then I always want a parent on this leadership team so that you have someone who can speak into if the ministry you're trying to do actually makes sense for a family with special needs. Because many times if you don't have a child with disability, you might come up with ministry ideas that really won't work well for a family with a disability. But then next, you're going to need to talk with senior leadership if you haven't already. And you need to share your plan, share your vision, and help break any myths that are out there. And we're going to get into myths here in just a second, but we need to break those myths and help them through that. So let's just take a minute and talk about how we can get senior leadership on board. And I've now done ministry in a church where senior leadership was completely opposed. And in fact, they told me they don't want people like my son at their church. But I was still able to start a special needs ministry. And then do ministry at a church where senior leadership was completely on board, where I was at my church that started SOAR at. And so it really makes a difference with senior leadership. But getting senior leadership of churches on board to start a disability ministry, it truly can be a challenging endeavor. However, with the right approach and the information, it is possible to make a case for why disability ministry is important and why it should be given priority. First, it's important to recognize disability ministry is not just a nice-to-have ministry. It is need. In fact, it is no longer an elective for a church. It is now a requirement. Every church is called to do this. We just saw that in Luke 14. People with disabilities are often left out of church activities and leadership because of misconceptions about their abilities and their potential. And this is a huge missed opportunity, as people with disabilities have unique gifts and talents that can completely enrich the church and its mission. But secondly, because it's important to articulate the need for disability ministry in terms that will resonate with the senior leadership of churches, disability ministry can actually benefit the entire church, because you're creating a more welcoming and a more inclusive environment. It can be a powerful tool for evangelism. And I'll get into that here in just a minute. But as people with disabilities are often less exposed to the gospel, we'll be sharing the gospel with them. And then third, it's important to demonstrate that a disability ministry can be successful. Share success stories from other churches. Provide statistics of how disability ministry has benefited other churches. Include information on resources that are available to help make the disability ministry successful. I always tell churches, let them know about SOAR. We exist to help you do better. And we can do training. We can help you develop everything needed. No, you don't have to do it alone. I learned all the pitfalls. I found all the pitfalls as I was doing it on my own. I can now come alongside a church and help them avoid that. But we want to include information on resources that are necessary to help make disability ministry successful, such as, what kind of qualified staff, the volunteers, and what financial resources are really needed. It's not going to break the bank. We're not talking about thousands and thousands of dollars. And then finally, it's important to emphasize the importance of creating a culture of inclusion. Emphasize that disability ministry should be seen as part of the church's outreach efforts, and that it should be a priority. And we have to present a compelling case of why disability ministry isn't necessary. And it's actually the senior leadership responsibility to be on board and to start this. And with the right approach and the right information, we can actually become a more welcoming and inclusive environment and work through it. So what I have found is just about every church I know has a care ministry. And care ministry, let's break that down, it's usually dealing with adults, and it includes things like benevolence, counseling, hospital, nursing, visitation teams, visitation for homebound, doing weddings, funerals, prayer teams, support teams, and sometimes they might even have a respite program for people. But the support teams can include like divorce care, grief share, meal trains, handymans, moving teams, all these different things. Well, now let's talk about a disability ministry. Disability ministry is for children and adults, and few churches do this. What does it include? It includes a buddy, a volunteer, a guide on the side on the weekend. It includes family support groups, maybe doing some respite care, maybe doing missions trips, camps, Bible study, sibling groups. So where are we having the problems? Why aren't more churches doing this? For me, the vast majority of pastors I've met truly want their churches to reach their community and grow. So my question is, where is the disconnect when it comes to families with disabilities? I truly believe that if the pastor hasn't experienced disability through a friend or a family member, they are just ignorant, are not aware of the fact that disability affects every community, all ethnicities, all ages, and all social classes. So this is also why care ministries exist in every church. Every church has a children's ministry because senior leadership knows if you don't have children's ministry, you're not going to grow your church. But they have care ministries because they've seen the church work with their parents. They've seen the impact on that and the need for that. They've experienced that. They just haven't experienced with individuals with disabilities. So if your senior leadership sees value in including children, youth, adults, senior adults, then they should see value in including persons with disability, because disability affects every single one of those groups. So why is there still such a massive movement to include people with disabilities? Isn't there a massive movement to include people with disabilities in the church? I truly believe the vast majority of pastors have no idea how to include people with disabilities and their families into the life of the church. And it just comes simply down to a lack of understanding and a lack of education. so that's where our job comes in. We have to see value in disabilities. God created and welcomes all people into fellowship with him. So who are we to discriminate based on someone's ability? It is the senior leadership's lack of understanding and education that leads to fear and then unending list of concerns they have in starting a disability ministry. So we need to help our senior leadership see value in individuals with disabilities and invite your pastor and his family to dinner. And then I go in and I invite a family with disability to the same dinner and have them bring their child. And the best way to learn is by breaking bread together and sharing stories of what life is like and how things really are. And what I always tell the family with the individual with disability is, do not be praying to have your child on good behavior. I want them to see what life is really like. And so while they're breaking bread, I want the family member to talk just how difficult it is to be able to attend church. I did this with one family, and mom sat there. She has 3 kids. One of them is a 9-year-old with autism. He's nonverbal. And the church was trying to start doing special needs service at the 8 o'clock service because they had space. They thought that would work best. And so this mom sat there and she bravely told the pastor, that will never work for our family or anyone else. She said, for my son, he's 9 years old. I have to get up, I wake him up, I get him dressed to go to church. Then I go wake up my other boys. I get them dressed. I come back, Johnny's naked. I have to get him dressed again. And then I go and I make breakfast for the kids. Come back, Johnny's naked again. I have to get him dressed again, second time. Then I go, I get my shower, and then I come back downstairs, Johnny's naked again. I have to redress him, third time. Then I go make sure my husband's up and he's all ready. Then I come back, Johnny's naked again. I have to get him dressed the 4th time. And then I go to make sure everyone else has everything ready. We're ready to go out the door. We're already 10 minutes late. Oh, Johnny's naked again. But this time, he had to go to the bathroom and he smeared poop all over the wall because I wasn't there to wipe him. And the pastor's sitting there with his mouth wide open. And he goes, why can't he dress himself? And why can't he wipe himself? And she said, because he's a child with special needs and he's never going to be able to. I'm going to have to do this his entire life. And all of a sudden, the pastor had the aha moment. He never realized that. And she said, I start my process at 6 a.m. and we're lucky to be there at 9:30. If you try to push us at 8 o'clock, we're never going to be able to come to your church and we're going to have to find a different church. It's that awareness that helped the pastor realize what was happening. So we've got to realize what's going on and being able to break bread together and see how that can work. But there are many myths that we hear from leadership. And I want to just share, these are actual myths that I've heard from senior leadership. Here are some of them. We don't have anyone with disabilities in our church. Why do we need a ministry? Other churches near us have a disability ministry, therefore we don't need to have one. Just send them there. Well, other churches have children's ministry too. Do we send them there? Other churches have worship ministries, but we still do them. I'm just too concerned about liability issues and being sued. It's too expensive and we just don't have the budget. We don't know where or how to start. It's just too hard and scary. What if we mess something up or say the wrong thing? We don't want to get a backlash from anyone. We don't have people with the right qualifications or to lead a ministry like that, nor do we have the resources. Our outreach ministry already supports a group that assists people with disabilities. It's not the church I want to attend. We don't need another ministry. We don't need a whole program just for a couple of individuals. We need volunteers more urgently in other ministries right now. We are a small church. Only big churches need to do it. We don't want to be overrun by needy families. The staff is already extremely busy and are unable to oversee another ministry, even if a lay leader manages it. If we start it, they will come. We just can't handle that. It doesn't fit with our mission statement. Well, I'm sorry, you need a new mission statement because you're not a biblical church. It's just not a need at our church. And then we don't have the room. These are all myths. Not a single one of them is legit. And so let's break down a couple of them. But to do it, I want to talk about the 3 C's of a disability ministry when it comes to the understanding. First, we have to comprehend, understand what inclusion is. Next, we need to communicate. We need to cast vision of inclusion. And then we need to collaborate, work towards inclusion. So let's break each one of these down. Let's talk about the first one, comprehending. We need to actually change philosophy of ministry. Inclusion ministry is less about starting a ministry to persons with disabilities than it is about changing your philosophy of ministry to include persons with disability. They're already in your church. Let's address that and serve them. It's not adding a new ministry. It is including individuals with disabilities into the existing ministries. That's what it's all about. You don't have to hire a special education teacher or a medical professional to include individuals with disabilities. Children with special needs are born to parents with no prior experience who simply love their child and get to know them. I'm a physician and I'm a parent. I've never given out an instruction manual as a physician. I never received an instruction manual as a parent on how to take care of my child. I learned by spending time with him and being a friend and learning that. That's what we're talking about. But comprehension of inclusion comes from relationships. It's all relationships. Being a friend. The only requirement there is to serve in the ministry is simply being a friend. Then next we have to communicate. We have to communicate what, why, and how before you do it with your leadership team and the rest of your team. And this helps them then to understand why, and then when they can communicate this to the congregation prior to launching anything. And we need to include how we address someone with special needs. We want to use first-person terminology. It's the boy with Down syndrome, the girl with cerebral palsy. It's not the autistic boy. We don't first use the diagnosis. Or, let's use what I actually prefer. It's Tommy. It's Susie. Let's call them by their name. They've all been given a God-given name. Let's not even allow the diagnosis to be what we call them. That doesn't need to be part of that. But we have to have effective communication starting at the top and then it trickles down. We need to create an elevator speech to share the vision. It needs to be short, 60 to 90 seconds, basically the length of an elevator ride, and make sure the entire team can share this. It prevents vision leak among your team. And say it frequently. Because again, the Great Commission, go and make disciples. Again, there is no prerequisite on it. We're all called to do that. And then we're called to collaborate, work towards inclusion. All existing ministries need to work together to be the most effective. The majority of kids and adults with disabilities can be included in existing ministries with little support or adaptation. And it's the changing of philosophy of ministry to include individuals of all abilities. But the teams need to all be on the same page. We need to have parking lot attendants, greeters, teachers, all need to be trained. One of my favorite examples I ever did, I trained our first impressions team that comes in contact with first-time visitors. And part of that was our parking lot greeters and attendants. Well, one of the things I teach in my training is that individuals with special needs, they have a hard time transitioning, going from one thing to another, because the way the brain is wired, they can't just snap quickly to something and change. It takes them a little bit of time, especially if it's something brand new. And I said, especially today, if you're ever in public and you see an elementary age child or a middle school, high schooler who's air quote misbehaving, That's not misbehavior. That today is autism. It's 1 out of every 33 individuals. That's autism. And so we need to be aware of that. I trained our parking lot attendants. That next day we had special parking spots for first-time visitors. A family parked there. They had 2 elementary kids. They had a hard time getting one of the boys out of the car. This gentleman went up and just started talking to them. Hey, is this your first time here? It was enough of a distraction. They got the other boy out of the car. He's like, great, let me walk you in to our check-in team. You know, we have a great children's ministry here. We have a good student ministry. We also have a special needs ministry here. Mom goes, oh, fantastic. Johnny has autism. The attendant goes, great, we have SOAR. There are special needs ministry. Doc or someone from the team will come and talk to you. They go start filling out the paperwork, checking in. They called me. I come out and talk to them. My very first question I have for any family with disability, my very first question after getting their name, I don't even want to know the diagnosis. My first question, tell me something wonderful about your child. Tell me something wonderful about your child. Mom started telling me, oh, he's got autism, he's nonverbal. I'm like, nope, time out. I want to know something wonderful. Because God created him on purpose and for a purpose. I know there's something wonderful about him. Tell me what it is. Guess what happens next? Mom and Dad start crying. Because no one has ever asked them that question before. Same thing, just thinking with that, the other thing that never happens, nobody ever asks an individual with special needs what they want to do when they get older. We just assume they can't. We have to change and include them. Hey, what do you want to do when you get older? And empower them to dream. But this mom said, oh, with tears coming down her face, Johnny loves to draw. He's an amazing artist. So I get down on Johnny's level and I say, hey, Johnny, you know what? I've got some pretty cool markers and paper. Can you draw me a picture? He lights up and just smiles. And I get a thumbs up from him. So I talk to Mom and Dad, get the information I need, and I say, okay, let's go back to his class. Mom goes, nope, Doc, he's not going to go. This is the 6th church in a row we've tried, and he will never move. We can't get him past the foyer. So instead, I go, hey, Johnny, let's go get that marker and paper, and let's start drawing some pictures. He jumps up, grabs my hand. We skip all the way down the hallway. I say, hey, here's our room right over here. He runs in. I go to the table. He went to the table. I got him his markers. He went there. I got him a buddy to work with him. He did marvelous. I drop off the sibling. He did great. And then I take Mom and Dad up to the church sanctuary for worship. And this is the statement I'm never going to forget in my life and the impact of all of this. Mom sat there with tears pouring down her face. Dad's completely choked up, can't say a word. And Mom said, Doc, I have no idea what your senior pastor's about to preach today. He can tell me that Satan sits on the throne of heaven. This is our new home church. Because no church has ever accepted our family the way that Christ wants us to be loved and accepted us for who we are and shown the true love of Jesus. Well, I'm glad to say we never preached that, and that family stayed with us. And it's all because we trained and we helped everyone in the church realize what this is all about. So we need to have everyone trained. We need to develop goals. We need to develop plans. And then we need to break these myths with senior leadership and everyone else. We need to change our objections to objectives. And this, in the world of special needs and inclusion, it's a huge black box of unknown. And we've got to change that. Even elderly respite care is unknown for meeting leadership teams, but it's due to this lack of knowledge and unknowns that makes us quickly dismissed. So again, changing objection to objectives. And let's just break down a couple of these. First one I heard a lot. Oh, there's just a lack of interest in this ministry. Well, you know what? When we include individuals with special needs into the life of the church, we are showing love and compassion to an unreached people group who are frequently marginalized and misunderstood. And this leads to an engaging and exciting ministry. And having a leader who is passionate and also able to share vision will just grow interest in others and help us be able to recruit both within and outside the church. The next one I hear a lot is oh, we have a lack of budget. We don't have the money for this ministry. Here's the great thing. It doesn't take a lot of money to start a ministry because it's based on relational and attention, just like every other ministry. Most sensory items are free or could be donated. In fact, fidget toys that we can use. The best fidget toys are McDonald's Happy Meal toys. 80% make perfect fidget toys. Ask parents to donate them. Because as soon as the kids get done playing with them at McDonald's, they come home, drop them on the floor, and all that happens is parents step on them with bare feet and hurt their foot. So parents are happy to get rid of them. But you can actually develop a sensory room or sensory corner or sensory boxes for as little as $250 to $500 and grow it as your ministry grows. And we'll talk about that here in just a little bit. But ministry can actually function on whatever size budget you have or you don't have. Liability. This is one I hear a lot. And actually, we just had a big talk with the church this week about it. Liability issues for the ministry. Well, you know what? Ministry can be messy at times and be risky. Just read the gospel. If we go back and read the gospels and see Jesus' ministry on earth was messy. So why do we think we have to have this pristine, clean, nice ministry today? It's unrealistic because Jesus never did. And so we don't need to do that. But we can have a plan to avoid being negligent and decrease liability. We need to train our volunteers. We need to have background check for our volunteers, have waivers with our families. Church insurance policies, they all cover everything without additional charges. Even at my church, when I did a large special needs day camp, 8 hours a day, provided medical care, provided medicine, gave food, it didn't cost us another penny from a liability standpoint. Because from the liability standpoint, they said there's no difference in doing that versus doing vacation Bible school. And then the one that I love, the liability insurance company said the highest liability any church has is a student ministry. That's where most liability comes from, but the things that students do. And so it's not from this. So we just need to be aware we can still be safe and do things and do it right and decrease the liability. Then the next one that's very close to this is there are safety issues for this ministry. So we need to have our parents and caregivers complete a plan of care so that we know what the best way to care for their individual is with special needs. You don't have to recreate this. You can email me. I'll send you our plan of care, take our name off, take our logo off, and put yours on it. At the end, I'll have my email on here, or you can go to our website and see that there. I'm happy to share that with you. But don't give this to them on day one. Because when a family comes to your church, we want to treat them just like we do everyone else that comes to your church. We don't ask the parents of a child with special needs to stay with their child in Sunday school. We need to get other people. We want to treat them just like everyone else. But we want to make sure they're going to be coming to the church. It's going to take about an hour to fill out this plan of care that I have. And so I don't do it until they come to the church 3 or 4 times and have decided they're going to start coming on a regular basis. You can still figure out the other things to take care of. But we want to create action plans for elopement or when they run away. We want to have other safety issues taken care of. Talk to security teams. Have them be part of your elopement runaway plan. Have behavior teams so when behavior happens, you can work through all that. And then the next one, we already hit on a little bit. If they build it, they will come. And I've already said this is a myth. We need to focus on who you already have and do ministry to the best of your ability. Again, like I said, families with disabilities, they're not going to come to your church until they know you are able to handle their individual with special needs. And they hear good compliments from other people through word of mouth. That average takes 18 to 24 months. So it's going to be a slow process. That even happened with us at SOAR. And it wasn't until we started doing outside events that it really started growing. The other one, and this is a real one, the church already has a shortage of volunteers. Well, the beauty is special needs ministry raises a whole new class of volunteers who are not currently serving or engaged in your church. But the other problem is we constantly go after the same group of volunteers in the church. I fully understand we are shooting this at you with a fire hose. Lots of information. And again, after the talk, I'll be available to answer any questions you might have. But we do have a lot of the notes there in the handout, and I've got some more extensive notes. You can email me, and I'm happy to share those with you.